Donald Trump's Justice Department indicted a judge, they've arrested a mayor, they tackled a U.S. senator, and now they've charged a U.S. Congresswoman for supposedly assaulting ICE agents. Now, assault has a very specific legal definition, and assault isn't just touching someone. Assault means you've placed someone in reasonable fear for their personal safety. So maybe Trump's personal lawyer turned interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey with zero criminal justice experience knows something about criminal justice we don't. But it sure looks like the Trump administration is making a concerted attempt to intimidate elected Democratic officials by weaponizing law enforcement, which is weird because I'm pretty sure I remember Attorney General Pam Bondi promising to end the weaponization of the DOJ at her confirmation hearing.
As Attorney General, how will you prevent the weaponization of the Department of Justice against Americans?
And Senator, you just gave the classic example of what's been happening regarding the weaponization. Will stop, must stop.
So let's break those charges down and take a closer look at the evidence behind them. The arrests of Newark Mayor Ras Baraka and Representative LaMonica McIver began with an incident on May 9th at Delaney Hall, a 1,000-bed immigrant detention center in Newark, New Jersey. Delaney Hall is owned by the Geo Group, a private prison company which inked a 15-year, billion-dollar contract with the Department of Homeland Security in February. Fun fact, Attorney General Pam Bondi used to be a lobbyist for Geo Group, which paid her almost $400,000 in 2019. It's probably just a coincidence that the EPA just dropped a complaint against Geo for unsafe working conditions at another immigrant detention center in California. The company crowed to investors that it would pocket $60 million a year to run the largest immigration detention center in the New York metro area. Almost immediately, Geo Group started housing immigrants there, despite the city of Newark claiming that they had no certificate of occupancy and were refusing access to health and safety inspectors. The facility has become a flashpoint for protesters. Detainees report being given inadequate and rotten food with meals served at irregular hours, sometimes as late as 11:30 p.m. That represents a serious health risk for people with conditions like diabetes who need to maintain their blood sugar levels. It also makes prisoners really agitated, and on June 13th, there were reports of an uprising among detainees protesting insufficient food and inhumane conditions. In fact, 4 prisoners escaped by pushing through an exterior wall, which was reportedly made of drywall and mesh, which is a pretty strong indication that those protesters had a point about the Geo Group throwing open the doors and grabbing stacks of taxpayer cash before making sure that the building was habitable. The facility is reportedly being vacated pending a security review. On the afternoon of May 9th, New Jersey Representatives LaMonica McIver, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and Rob Menendez Jr. showed up at the facility along with Mayor Baraka. Representative Coleman tweeted, "We're at Delaney Hall, an ICE prison in Newark that opened without permission from the city and in violation of local ordinances. We've heard stories of what it's like in other ICE prisons. We're exercising our oversight authority to see for ourselves." What happened next is not entirely clear, thanks in large part to the government, which has put out multiple versions of the story. While it was going on, that is, while the representatives were in the waiting room, the Department of Homeland Security put out a press release stating that a group of protesters, including 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, stormed the gate and broke into the detention facility. Representatives Robert Menendez Jr. and Bonnie Watson-Coleman and multiple protesters are holed up in a guard shack, the first security checkpoint. And DHS spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin told CNN that we actually have body camera footage of those members of Congress assaulting these ICE enforcement officers, including body slamming a female ICE officer. Bonnie Watson-Coleman is 80. She's not body slamming anybody. And while Representatives Menendez and McIver are in their 30s, they're not exactly linebackers. The timeline here is critical, and the Washington Post laid it out really cleanly, so let's look at this moment by moment. At 1:15, the congressional representatives approached the gate at Delaney Hall. They did not storm the gate. They did not need to storm the gate. They are entitled to enter to conduct oversight at any time under the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2024, and they don't have to call first, as Representative Menendez pointed out. In fact, ICE's own policy manual acknowledges this, and the fact that the staff at Delaney Hall were unaware of it and initially refused these congresspeople entry does not exactly convey that Geo was totally prepared to open a federal detention facility in compliance with all state and federal laws. At 1:21, the gate opened to let in a car, and the representatives walked in behind it. According to the Post, Homeland Security agents, some of them wearing camouflage, emerged from the facility and escorted the 3 inside to a waiting area where they were made to wait for an hour. At roughly 1:48, the guards let Mayor Baraka inside the gate with his security detail. It's not clear why they let him in, and again, the government has told multiple versions of this story to different federal judges. Was he admitted because the guard was under the impression that he was part of the congressional delegation? Was he allowed to enter into the secured area when the guard became concerned for his safety amidst the crowd of protesters? Did he break into the facility some other way, perhaps scaling the walls like Spider-Man, as implied by the suggestion that he unlawfully entered and remained inside Delaney Hall? For what it's worth, Baraka says that the guard invited him inside in hopes of calming the crowd.
Delaney! Yes! Delaney!
Once inside, Baraka basically stood in the yard for about 45 minutes until 2:33, when Homeland Security agents came out of the facility and told him to get out. After about 5 minutes of back and forth, the agent in charge threatened to arrest Baraka, at which point he agreed to leave. You can hear the agent say, "All right then, walk out."
All right then, walk out.
Which he did at 2:39, accompanied by his bodyguards and the members of Congress. According to Menendez, the representatives then went back inside the gate and prepared to tour the facility.
Right? We went inside and were there for over an hour and a half. When we came back, that's when we saw the mayor.
But when they overheard agents discussing their plan to go arrest Baraka, Menendez walked over to the gate and told Baraka what was happening.
But ICE and a member of the ICE team that was there was on the phone with someone who told the person there, even though Mayor Baraka was on the public side of the fence, to go arrest him.
The agents then rushed outside, followed by the representatives, and attempted to arrest Baraka. The congresspeople tried to form a human chain around the mayor. Now, it's clear that they did this because they are federal officials who were reasonably confident that Homeland Security wouldn't manhandle them, which was apparently wrong. In the scrum, as everyone was jostling and being jostled, MacIver slams into and is slammed into by the federal agents trying to grab the mayor. After the ICE agents successfully take him into custody, they drag him back inside the gate. And now this one's going to be important. The representatives are also allowed back inside the gate, and in fact, they went on to tour the facility as they were allowed to do by federal law. Okay, so before the indictment of Representative MacIver, the Justice Department tried and failed to indict Baraka. That very day, May 9th, Acting U.S. Attorney Alina Habba announced that her office intended to charge Baraka with trespassing. Now, we've met Habba before on this channel. She used to be Donald Trump's personal lawyer after wowing him by sidling up to a 21-year-old waitress at his New Jersey golf club and getting that girl to drop her sexual harassment suit for a paltry $15,000. Habba went on to net Trump negative $500 million between his civil fraud case and the two E. Jean Carroll defamation and assault suits. Habba also sued Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and about 40 other people for doing the RICO to Donald Trump, which got them both on the hook for $1 million in sanctions. Habba has zero experience as a prosecutor, but on March 23rd, Trump named her interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey. This involved pushing out John Giordano, a loyalist Trump himself had installed just 3 weeks prior, an act he accomplished by naming Giordano as ambassador to Namibia. By the way, interim appointments can only last for 120 days by law. As of this recording, Habba's about 90 days into that, so watch this space on July 22nd. Anyway, on May 9th, Habba's office files a complaint against Baraka for criminal trespassing. Note that this is a complaint, not an indictment, which means that Habba did not have to go to a grand jury or present evidence. All she had to do was present an affidavit to a magistrate judge suggesting that there was probable cause to believe Baraka had committed a crime. It is very much not the norm for prosecutors to file a complaint without an indictment in the case of a minor crime like trespass. Generally, complaints exist to get someone dangerous off the streets while prosecutors go to a grand jury and build their case. So this reeked of political grandstanding. After a complaint is filed, the government has 30 days to seek an actual indictment. But it never got there in the case of Baraka because just 10 days later, Habba tweeted that she had agreed to dismiss Mayor Baraka's misdemeanor charge of trespass for the sake of moving forward, which is not how real prosecutors talk. Moving forward is a political goal. Prosecutors are in the business of trying and winning cases. And okay, we don't know why she agreed to drop that trespassing case, but I think we can speculate that it probably had something to do with the fact that the guards let the mayor inside the gate for fill-in-the-blank reason and then asked him to leave, which he did. Remember that clip?
All right then, walk out.
Whatever the reason, Magistrate Judge Andre Espinoza, who signed the original complaint, was deeply unimpressed. In the dismissal hearing, he called it an embarrassing retraction and lectured Haba's deputy that your office must operate with a higher standard than that. Baraka then sued Haba and the agent who swore out the complaint against him, alleging false arrest, malicious prosecution, and defamation. He's represented in that complaint by the legendary New Jersey litigator Nancy Erica Smith, who represented the country club waitress in her successful lawsuit to void that settlement agreement Haba foisted on her. LOL. But Haba had something to comfort her, at least, because by then she'd filed new charges, this time against Representative LaMonica McIver. I guess that's what she meant by moving forward. On May 19th, Haba's office filed a complaint against McIver, accusing her of forcibly assaulting, resisting, or impeding a federal officer in the performance of his official duties in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 111A1. Once again, Haba seems to have been trying to juice the news cycle by getting out the complaint when there was zero urgency to take a dangerous criminal off the street. Filing a complaint weeks after the incident and before going to the grand jury gives the whole game away. But this time, Haba did eventually get in front of a grand jury and secure an indictment. Representative McIver is charged with 2 felony counts and 1 misdemeanor under Section 111A1. Count 1 alleges that during her attempt to thwart the arrest of Baraka, McIver slammed her forearm into the body of victim 1. McIver also reached out and tried to restrain victim 1 by forcibly grabbing him. The Post captured that part of the altercation here. And here's the moment described in count 2, which alleges that McIver pushed past victim 2 while using each of her forearms to forcibly strike victim 2 as she returned inside of the secured area of Delaney Hall. Count 3 is the misdemeanor, which just says generally that McIver did forcibly assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, and interfere with officials engaged in and on account of their performance of their official duties. Haba immediately put out a tweet congratulating herself and boasting that the indictment has a maximum penalty of 8 years for count 1, an additional maximum penalty of 8 years for count 2, and a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison for count 3, which is ridiculous since courts rarely impose the maximum penalty for first-time offenders and they almost never impose consecutive sentences for the same set of allegations. So even if McIver were convicted, pretending that she might face 17 years in prison because 8 plus 8 plus 1 is 17 is so hacky and amateurish. But I guess we should cut her some slack. It's like her first day as a prosecutor, and it gave her a chance to sign the indictment as United States Attorney. Again, she's not the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey because she hasn't been confirmed by the Senate. She's not even the acting U.S. Attorney since she hasn't been nominated for a full term. She's the interim U.S. Attorney, a placeholder, and she won't even be that for much longer. But at least her boss was happy.
The days of woke, no, I didn't. The days of woke are over. That woman, I have no idea who she is.
Maybe the congratulations are a bit premature, though. Now, just as a complaint is not an indictment is not the same as a grand jury verdict. A grand jury is heavily tilted in favor of prosecutors. The defendant is not present and cannot present evidence or rebuttal. A grand jury need only find that there is probable cause to believe that the crime occurred, not guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, as with a petit jury, or what most people just call a jury. The grand jury is made up of 16 to 23 jurors who sit for a longer term and usually hear more than one case. Prosecutors can secure an indictment if a mere 12 of those jurors vote in favor of it. So whoever succeeds Haba will have to convince all 12 petit jurors that their Congresswoman deliberately tried to hit those poor little ICE cops. But I think the problem with this indictment is that all parties acknowledge that Representative McIver was at Delaney Hall doing her job as a Congresswoman. Well, maybe not all parties. The indictment alleges that on or about May 9th, McIver arrived at Delaney Hall allegedly to conduct a congressional oversight inspection. But of course, they did let her into Delaney Hall along with Representatives Coleman and Menendez because McIver was there in her capacity as Newark's Congresswoman, not allegedly. And members of Congress enjoy what's called speech or debate immunity. That is, under the Constitution, senators and representatives shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of peace be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. That has always been understood to mean that you cannot charge members of Congress for doing their jobs, which Representative McIver will certainly assert as a defense here. So come with me back to that timeline for a second. Remember how the 3 representatives were inside Delaney Hall when Baraka showed up at the gate and was let in by the guards. That is clearly part of MacIver's job as a congresswoman, because otherwise they wouldn't have let her in the building. Here she is during the arrest where she says over and over again, "Don't touch me, I'm a federal official." She clearly thinks she's doing her job protecting a constituent, which the mayor is. Now, I'm sure that the lawyers who actually work in the office where Hobb is camping out will argue that MacIver was not acting in an official capacity during the 30 seconds they say she assaulted those ICE cops. But then, look what happens next. See how they let her go back inside the gate? Everybody there that day thought she was still acting in her official capacity. That's why they let her go in and actually tour the place after Baraka had been arrested. If she ceased to be acting as a U.S. representative, she'd have had no right to be back inside those gates. I mean, the government's argument here is that just for the 30 seconds of that scrum where everyone was jostling and the ICE agents were grabbing her and even shoving her, MacIver quit being there in official capacity, and then she immediately went back to being a congresswoman covered by speech or debate immunity and entitled to due oversight of Delaney Hall 30 seconds later. How's that argument going to play out in front of a jury if indeed it ever gets there? I mean, I don't know, but I do know that it is not an argument that the U.S. Attorney's Office had to present during grand jury proceedings to get this indictment. For her part, MacIver remains defiant. She says she was simply doing her job and called the indictment a brazen attempt at political intimidation and an effort to dodge accountability for the chaos ICE caused and scare me out of doing the work I was elected to do. She'll be arraigned on June 25th, and the case will be heard by Judge Demel Semper, a Biden appointee who worked for many years in the U.S. Attorney's Office Hobb is currently running. But even if this case is dropped, like the charges against Mayor Baraka, it's a massive escalation in the administration's efforts to punish its critics. Now, it's particularly interesting to see how the media is covering the charges against MacIver. About 300 sources covered the indictment split evenly, with about 25% of coverage coming from the left, 25% from the right, and 50% from the center. And when you examine the headlines, you see very different frames emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events that are unfolding. From the right, MacIver's guilt is presented as a foregone conclusion, framing her actions as breaching the ICE facility or that a lengthy prison sentence looms. This is in stark contrast to headlines from the left, which were most likely to characterize her interactions with ICE in softer language like tussle and confrontation. And then from the center, headlines were most likely to simply focus on the fact that she was indicted. The headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news, and that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as I can with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now, they're offering LegalEagle viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. Scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get the discount for a limited time. Or simply download the Ground News mobile app and enter LegalEagle, all one word, as the discount code. Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. One of my favorite parts is the bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources you've never heard of, where there's no telling who owns it or what agenda they might have. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. And with so much happening in the news right now, it's easy to miss important stories, like the story of escalating nuclear tension between Iran and Israel that was entirely ignored by left-leaning sources. This type of analysis helps explain why we often talk past each other and why some people seem hyper-focused on what to others seems unimportant or outright fake news. Ground News is my favorite way to get the news, and as a legal eaglet, you can save 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code on screen or clicking on the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and blind spot feed, and by subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. So click the link below or scan the code today. And after that, click on this link for more LegalEagle, or we will see you in court.